Hey guys, André here, with something a little bit different and slightly more personal than usual, perhaps, at least at first. Because, in the last 24 hours, I had some time to think back on our video from yesterday in which we discussed the Zelda DLC Pack 1. And seeing the reaction to it, and also rewatching the video myself, I realized I'm not entirely happy with how that went down. For two reasons. One, I don't think I argued my points that effectively. I think I made my points at certain times during the video, but at other times I kind of like lost the message and I just didn't convey what I was trying to particularly well. And as part of that, I also didn't treat my colleagues or their arguments with the respect that they deserved. And while they both know that I have a deep respect for them, that didn't come through in that video. So I apologize to Ash and Derek, as well as you guys, just for how I came across in that, because in rewatching it, it sounded more talk radio than GameXplain. And while I liked that it was lively, it was a little bit too lively for us, I think. So, yes, disagreements are good. We should embrace those differences, and, you know, arguing them is fine, but we should handle that in a way better than I did. And I have to admit, Ash handled himself much better than I did, so... yeah, so I wanted to get that out in the open, and also I wanted to take this opportunity to better explain where I was coming from. And as part of that, before I started making this video, I sat down and really analyzed why I was feeling this way, because again, I kind of lost a point during that discussion, because what ended up happening, I think, is I was more against the idea of the DLC in general than the DLC itself specifically. So I was kind of arguing something grander, and that didn't really help, because I think like, whereas Ash is more focused on the specifics of this, I was kind of arguing against the idea in general. So now that I had a chance to really sit down and think about it, I wanted to, you know, kind of go more specifically over why I feel this way, and also how, and I guess as part of that, challenge my own ideas as well, because I realized, honestly, this isn't that big of a deal. Not yet, at least, and I'll get to that. Here, specifically, it's not that big of a deal, not nearly as big of a deal as I might have made it out to be. And the funny thing is, I even said that in the video. I said by the act, you know, something along the lines of, like, it's not that big of a deal, and by the mere act of discussing it, it makes it sound like a bigger deal than it is. But the problem is, even though I had said that, I didn't come across that way. It's still, you know, I still made it out to be something bigger than it really is. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and go through these reasons here for why I feel this way, and hopefully I can convey this better than I did last time. Alright, so basically I boiled it down to 3 different reasons for why I don't like this DLC. And you know what, before we get to that, and someone is honking their horn a lot right now, that's great. Alright, but before we get to that, I wanted to clear up something, but I saw a lot of responses along the lines of, André doesn't like DLC, and that is so not true. That really couldn't be farther from the truth. I have no problems with DLC as an idea, or even in practice. Up till this point, my experience with the DLC, at least as applies to Nintendo, has been fine. Now granted, I haven't played every Nintendo game with DLC, namely the Fire Emblem game, so it's entirely possible I'll have similar issues with them. I'm not familiar with how they handle DLC, but we're gonna ignore that for this conversation. But yeah, Mario Kart 8 did great with it, Splatoon did great, so I'm not... And I know my argument kind of got misconstrued as well, partially through my own means of conveying it, in that I want all DLC to be free. No, that's not true. I don't expect things to be free. But I'm going to explain kind of where I was coming from with that, again, as I go through this. Alright, so in principle, DLC is good. Especially when it exists in a modular sense, where it only adds content instead of modifying existing content. So characters, tracks, new modes, that's all great. That's like taking Lego blocks and stacking them up. You still have a basic, or adding them to a house, for instance. You still have a basic house, but now the house is bigger. That's good. My problem is when you start swapping out those bricks for other bricks. And that's going into what I'm going to say here. So, the first reason for why I'm not super thrilled with the Zelda DLC, Pack 1 at least, is because of a term I really wish I had realized during the discussion, but saw it come up in the comments, is because of these quality of life enhancements that they're adding. So basically, this encompasses, I would say, the Hero's Path mode, in which a game shows you where and where you haven't been in the world for the past 200 hours. The Travel Medallion, which now allows you to get around the world a little bit easier by letting you set up a warp point to anywhere you want, basically. And then the Korok Mask, which helps you find Korok seeds. So, yeah, these are basically quality of life enhancements, which again is something I wish I'd realized before, but that is such a brilliant term for this. Where basically they are making the game play better. They are improving things about the game. They are taking aspects of the game that might be a little bit annoying or perhaps not, perhaps don't work quite as well as intended, and improves them. So, that, I mean, on paper, that's all fine. Like, that's good. Who doesn't want improvements, right? Finding those Korok seeds without a guide is basically impossible. Having that mask will help. And that combined with the Hero's Path mode will help you, see where in the world you haven't been, and again, help you track down those Korok seeds. My problem with that, though, is we've seen stuff like this before from Nintendo, similar content like this, that wasn't free and were part of an update. Specifically, or some ideas for, or some examples of this, is how in Mario Kart version 2, Mario Kart 8 version 2, they allowed you to save your kart setup as well as display an on-screen map. Both of those were good changes. They were kind of lacking before, and that improved the game. And I feel that's kind of the same thing here too. So I feel like if Mario, or if Nintendo had charged for those features in Mario Kart 8, I would have had the exact same complaints. And to be fair, it would be completely within their right to charge for them. I have no issue with companies having the right to charge for anything they want. That's fine. At the same time, I have a right to not like that. And in this case, I do think it's kind of like crossing that line a little bit. Just because it kind of feels like the game had some deficiencies that they're now improving, but they're charging you for the privilege of making it better. Now, obviously, the game is great as is. It has insane scores, so obviously these issues don't matter that much. But it is a little bit concerning for just like moving forward, like what that represents. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, so I'll circle back to that in a little bit. All right, next up is point 2. This is a choice. And yes, that is an argument before and against it, I feel like. Ash made a great argument that, like, hey, if you don't like it, don't buy it. He's absolutely right. You don't have to. But I feel like it introduces a question that you shouldn't have to ask yourself when you buy a single-player game. Because now, from the get-go, you have to ask yourself which version of the experience you want. Do you want the one you already paid for, or do you want the one that is slightly enhanced that costs even more money? So I don't like that at this, right from the get-go, you're already not sure if you have the version, the best version of the game that you should be playing. Now again, you don't have to buy it, but then at that point, I feel like you're kind of asking yourself, you might find yourself asking yourself throughout the game if you are getting the optimal version, if you should buy. If you should upgrade to the $20 pack, or, getting the pack 1. And that kind of like, I feel like that kind of chips away at the immersion for me. Like, I am a fan of losing myself in these games. Zelda specifically, I mean, this is part of why this came up. Zelda is meant to be an immersive game. They constructed a world that is believable. But when if I have to ask myself throughout the game if I should do something outside the context of the game to enhance my enjoyment of the game within the game, that's when it kind of crosses the line again. Again, it's not a huge deal, but it's just something that kind of like, rubs me slightly the wrong way, especially when we get back to point 1, these being quality of life enhancements by and large. For the most part, not everything in there would qualify, I would say. Yeah, I don't know. I don't like having to ask myself that. I feel like, they created this world to be played in a specific way, which is the world you bought, but now they created a slightly different version of it that you can also have the option of buying in addition. So, it just complicates things in a way that I feel like shouldn't be complicated. Maybe that's just me going back to, harkening back to an earlier time where you bought the game and that was the game. That was the definitive version of that game. Although, to be fair, they did release subtly enhanced versions even back then, usually fixing bugs, like versions 2 and 3. But the thing is, you didn't know about those back then. You might occasionally find a friend with a slightly different version from yourself of the same game. But even then, like, that's something that really only became widely known in the internet era, when people were able to compare different versions of the game. Like for instance, how the blood for Ganon in Ocarina of Time changed from red in the original version that I have, the gold copies of the game, to green in later versions of the game. They're like the small tweaks like that, and which I don't really think are even close to the same thing here, but I was just throwing that out as an example. Alright, so yeah, so I think it has the potential to chip away at the immersion, as well as, actually kind of related to this point, as well as just kind of throw off the balance of the game. So, in the case of the, what's it called? The sword trial, or trial of the sword, I think it was called. The game was balanced in a way to take into account the fact that the Master Sword, doesn't last indefinitely. But now with this new trial, once you beat that, it sounds like the Master Sword is much more powerful than before, in that it basically won't run out of energy. And I feel like, again, it kind of subtly tweaks the game in a way that wasn't originally intended. And I'm one who's kind of a purist in that I like playing games as they were meant to. And now that does kind of change the game in a way that it wasn't designed originally, that you now have the option to. So again, it kind of brings up the question of like, which version of this game do I want to play? I like not having to ask myself that in an immersive game like Zelda. Again, not a big deal in this case. It really isn't. I made it out to be a bigger deal than it was, but that was kind of where I was coming from. Finally, point 3. And this is kind of the biggest point where I was coming from, and I think part of the reason why I came across more overbearing than I meant to is because these 3 points kind of combined together. Like, it was 3 different things that were annoying me, and they kind of combined together into a bigger issue than either of them are in isolation, or really even combined. But it's point 3 that I think is the biggest issue I have with it here. And that's the fact that the game, the way Nintendo's gone about this DLC with the splitting up the $20 cost between 2 packs that are released at different times, with you not even knowing what Pack 2 does at the time, by the time we know what Pack 1 does, or even how you could buy both packs without even knowing what both of them do, except in the vaguest of terms. That kind of irks me a little bit. And I'll get into specifically why here. But before that, again, I understand it's still a choice. You have a choice not to buy this. Again, on paper, that's fine. You don't have to buy it if you don't know what it does, and I think that would be the optimal solution. But here's where things get a little bit weird. Because now that we know what Pack 1 does, but we don't know what Pack 2 does, we're reaching a point of... You kind of have to make a choice, unless you want to sacrifice the experience you have with both of those packs. Because unless you decide to hold off on playing Zelda until Pack 2 is fully revealed or comes out, you're either... If you decide to hold off on... Okay, I'm not explaining this well. If you decide to play Zelda now, and decide to hold off on Pack 1, or hold off on buying the DLC, you are kind of compromising the experience of Pack 1. Because Pack 1 is going to be most effective when you're playing through this game for the first time. These are providing, things that will help you explore the game and enhance presumably will enhance your experience with the game. But if you hold off on knowing what Pack 2 is, you're probably going to be done with Zelda by that point. Which means Pack 1's value just dropped way less than it would have been otherwise if you had played from the get-go. But the advantage now is you at least will know what Pack 2 is when you buy it. And Pack 2, hopefully by that point, if you decide to buy it, you know it's now worth your value. But Pack 1 is reducing the overall value since it's no longer as applicable to you, since you already beat the game, presumably, unless you're taking a really long time to play the game. Now, on the other hand, you can of course decide to buy Pack 1 now, but that's at the risk that Pack 2 doesn't deliver. That doesn't fully fulfill a $20 value that you spent. Now, to be clear, I think Nintendo's handled DLC pretty well up to this point, and odds are they will deliver on that value, but I still don't like having to gamble with my money, taking that risk when we don't know what Pack 2 fully encompasses. We don't know really anything about that additional story mode. We don't know how long it is, what kind of content it is, whether it's a new section of the world, whether it reuses the whole world. We have no idea. And that's what bugs me, that now in order to get the full value of Pack 1, you have to kind of take a slight gamble on Pack 2 fully delivering that value. Now again, I think they will, but I don't know that for sure, and I don't think we should have to take that gamble in order to fully get the full value of these packs. So yeah, that was kind of where I was coming from with this. I'm just not a huge fan of that. I feel like Nintendo should be a little bit more transparent about what is in these packs, and ideally even allow us to buy them separately. The fact that they grouped them together like this is, I mean, I said it was shady. Honestly, on the scale of if there were a shady scale of 0 to 10, is like probably 2 or 3. It's pretty low, admittedly. But still, it's veering closer to that territory than I've expected Nintendo to. But again, though, you don't have to buy it. You have a choice to ignore it completely, and that kind of resolves all these issues. But if you do decide to buy Pack 2 down the line, again, Pack 1's less in value. So yeah, I'm kind of repeating myself at this point. But that's where I was coming from. Alright, so now that we have my reasons out of the way, I wanted to break it down a little bit more, because I did see some good points come up where it may seem like I potentially contradicted myself a little bit, and I'm going to go over why I might have and might not have at the same time. Alright, so one of the questions that came up was Derek asked, how do I feel about director's cuts and extended cuts of movies? And I said I'm generally not a fan, but I have no problem with them existing. And I say I'm generally not a fan because I like the idea of knowing when I experience something, I'm experiencing something, I can talk about that experience with someone who also experienced the same media in basically the same way. In the case of a movie, it's, you know, a little bit more specific because if you're watching the exact same movie, it's always the same movie. Whereas with a game, everyone's going to have their own unique play styles and play experiences, but it's still the same core game. So I like that simplicity. I like knowing that when I'm talking about one thing, we're on the same page. Once you introduce extended cuts and director's cuts, that's where things change. But that can change how you perceive these movies. That can change the context of scenes. And that's why, in principle, I'm kind of against them. I like having that just have one definitive version of something. Now, at the same time, I have to admit, there are some director's cuts out there I actually like more than the original version, such as Aliens or The Abyss. Both James Cameron movies, by the way. Although I didn't like the Terminator 2 definitive version. I felt like the original version was better there. So, yeah, so clearly they're not terrible across the board, even in my opinion. And then that gets to kind of like another point here. How about video game remakes? So games like Wind Waker HD, or even the very recent Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which I did see come up in the comments a little bit, because essentially these are basically what this DLC is, right? They take an existing game and modify it, make it better. They have improvements. So yeah, on paper, my argument really doesn't make that much sense in terms of like purely existing, because I had no problems with those games existing. I actually didn't like the original Wind Waker, but I really liked Wind Waker HD because I thought it fixed that game's problems. And the Mario Kart Deluxe, I mentioned, you know, it takes a really good game and makes it a little bit better. It adds new good content, does tweak some of the gameplay in the existing game, and for the better, I felt like. So yeah, in trying to figure out what the difference is, I realized the main difference there is time. And that might sound like not much of a distinction, but I also think it's kind of a big distinction at the same time. Because generally, director's cuts and extended editions usually come out years down the line. Or in the case of remakes even, Wind Waker HD was, what, almost 10 years after the original game? If not more than 10 years? I don't have my years right in front of me. Mario Kart Deluxe 2, even though that was on the shorter end of the spectrum, that was still 3 years later. So at that point, it feels like the developers of the original movie or game, they had time to sit back, see what worked, see what didn't, and then modify the game to take that into account and ultimately make a better experience. In the case of Zelda, we're barely 2 months out for this game launching, and they're already issuing improvements in the same vein, as I mentioned, with the original Mario Kart 8 patches, like version 2 of that game, where they're subtly enhancing the game, but not in major ways, not to the degree that these remakes did as well. And that's what kind of irks me, because it now feels like they're charging you for kind of issues with the game. And I don't want to go over the whole thing again, but like, it does kind of, like, I guess that's where my argument more is coming from. It's not so much this case specifically, although it is part of it, but more what this represents. Because it kind of frightens me a little bit that we may potentially be living in a time where games are designed with deficiencies, which you are then charged to fix. So in this case, in the specific example, that would be Korok Siege, which are pretty much impossible to find without a guide, you know, and not having a map that tells you where in the world you have or haven't been that effectively. These are now improvements that you can pay for to make the game better. And the cynical side of me wonders, like, is there a chance that this is a slippery slope, and down the line, games will be designed with these deficiencies in mind and charge you to make up for them? And that's what's really concerning. Obviously, in the case of Zelda, it's a great game, regardless. The reviews, you know, are through the roof for this game. So it's not that big of a concern for this game, especially if you're not 100%ing it. But it is more what it represents. And that's where I kind of like lost the message a little bit in the discussion, because whereas I think Ash was discussing the specifics of this, I was arguing in a grander sense, but I don't think I made that clear. So yeah, it really is more what it could potentially represent, as opposed to the specifics of this case. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm landing on this. So I think I'm not, again, so I mean, to summarize, I guess, I'm not a huge fan of what I've learned in this DLC at this point, but I do want to keep an open mind as to how it actually is. Maybe I'll come around, maybe I'll like it, maybe I won't mind the $20 charge for these fixes. I don't know at this point, I haven't tried them yet. And again, maybe Pack 2 will fully deliver on the full value of that. Maybe Pack 2 will be worth it by itself. I mean, it depends how you look at this, right? Maybe Pack 2 is fully worth a $20 cost, and everything else again on top of that is just gravy. But the thing is, again, at this point, if you're buying it, it is still a risk. We don't know. We only know in the vaguest of sense what's in Pack 2. And I wish Nintendo were a little bit more clear on that. Maybe they didn't even know at that point what it was fully going to encompass. But maybe it should be announcing that if that's the case. So yeah, I do. If there's one thing I want to make clear or rectify from our previous discussion on this, I want to be open-minded about this, whereas I definitely wasn't in that discussion. I don't think I gave us a good look in that discussion, and I could give any number of excuses for why that is, but I won't. I'll just own up to it. I didn't come across that well in the discussion, and I want to, you know, and I want to strive to do better in the future, and I think we've done it in the past. So really, that was kind of a one-off, and I just didn't come across that well in that discussion. So yeah, so especially as it applies to DLC, I'm going to remain open-minded on this. I think Nintendo could handle this better, such as allowing us to buy them separately. That'd be a better alternative. But this isn't as big of a deal as I made it out to be. But yeah, I am standing by and large, my arguments in general, but they aren't nearly the issue I made them out to be. So yeah, hopefully this clears it up a little bit. I just wanted to, I felt like I had to put this out there. I don't like making response videos myself, but in this case, I feel like this was the exception, because I didn't convey my argument well, and I really did want to sit down and kind of figure out why I felt that way, and better explain where I was coming from, as well as apologize to my colleagues and you guys for my less than optimal performance in that. If you know, really, this is the quality of life enhancement right now. This is the DLC to that discussion. Alright, anyways, I'm rambling now, so I'm gonna cut this off, because I could go on for a while just repeating the same points I've already made. But yeah, in short, I think Nintendo's handled DLC well, and I look forward to hopefully them continuing that with Zelda, even if they've made some missteps so far. Alright, I'm done with this. Catch you guys later. Bye.